everybody sort of wants to be the hero at the end, but nobody really wants to be the hero while you're going through the difficulty, or the leader while you're going through the difficulty. And that's the challenge. I mean, I often ask on interviews, like, hate to lose or love to win. But the Hugo quote actually says, adversity makes great leaders, prosperity makes monsters. And the nuance there is that it's not just about achieving or winning once. It's really doing it consistently. And I think that's a unique skill set for leadership.
Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we sit down with executive leaders to explore what leadership really means through the lens of their stories, their wins, their struggles, their vision, and their lessons along the way. I'm Ty Hammond, founder of One Mountain Leadership and creator of the True Leadership Approach, an awareness-based path that helps leaders shift their focus from what to do about their problems to how to grow from them. Whether you're just stepping into leadership or are well-seasoned and at the top of your game, your potential won't be realized following someone else's script, but you can draw insights from their stories and turn it into wisdom by putting it into practice in your own life. Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we explore the essence of leadership beyond tactics and performance by sitting down with executives to hear what matters most to them. I'm your host, Ty Hammond. Today's guest is Dean Scontras. Dean is Vice President of SLED at Island, where he leads strategy and growth across state, local, and education markets. With more than 30 years in the technology sector, Dean is a seasoned public sector executive known for building high-performing teams and navigating complex regulatory environments. He specializes in helping government agencies modernize securely, bringing visibility, governance, and scalable AI adoption to environments where stakes are high and margin for error is low. Leveraging deep relationships and a nuanced understanding of public sector needs, Dean drives transformative solutions that align policy, security, and operational impact. It's my pleasure to have Dean with me here today. Welcome to the show, Dean.
Ty, thanks for having me. I'm excited to do this.
Fantastic. Well, I always start here with this question. Every leader, of course, has a beginning that starts taking shape long before we make it to any executive position of leadership. I'm curious, who's someone from your early life or an early experience that really shaped not only the leader, but the person that you are today?
Yeah. Um, I thought about this a little bit, which is, from a very early age, probably like most young boys growing up in middle America, you develop a sort of fascination for the archetypal hero type, right? Mine first was sports. It would later become politics and history. But I think, early on, it was sports was the crucible for leadership for me. I was drawn to that. I think, I definitely had a competitive spirit from very early on. Uh, I think early on I faced, at least in athletics, a lot of adversity, and I think that's the ultimately the crucible for leadership, which is it looks good, um, but you have to lead through challenges, and I think the great leaders are able to do that. So I don't know if there's one person in particular I could point to a lot, including my own father, but in his favorite saying, which there's a little bit of a derivation on the Hugo Black, I think it was Hugo Black, quote of, through adversity comes prosperity. And I think that's true. So I had that tendency, and I think that, in sports or business or politics or whatever it may be, is that, you make that decision, early on, whether you want to be a spectator and watch it or you want to be a participant. And I guess that's the early thing. I wanted to be a participant, and I wanted to be, I like those stories of the dramatic comeback or leading through, adversity and challenges. That I was drawn to that. That sounds very cliche, but from a very early age, I was drawn to it, and that continued throughout my high school athletic career and my college athletic career, as well as now into business.
I'm curious, is there any particular type of challenge or adversity that you remember
Yeah,
experiencing?
I do. I'll use this one early on because I think it was a good one, which is I came from, again, like a small town, and not middle America. It was in New England, so it's not really the football breadbasket of the United States. But for years, my little town had a very successful program. And, as I was entering high school, it was no longer very successful. And I remember I wanted to play really bad and I wanted to win. And it was just season after season of losing. And of course, participation in the program went down. And I find myself really one summer having to knock on doors to get, you know, boys to come out and play on the football team. That year we didn't win a game. That was I think my freshman year. And then we won 4 the next year and then 6 the next year. But, that was probably one of my earliest experiences with, you know, leading through adversity, getting people to buy in on the vision, even when the vision was very, very bleak. So that to me is probably one of the earliest ones I had, which was literally knocking on doors and begging kids to play so we could field the team.
I really see you tying together those ends there of how that experience informed you in terms of leading through that adversity, but also getting that buy-in
Yeah,
from
100% getting the buy-in, and even when times were very difficult, and getting people to continue to believe in it. And once you do that, and you can, paint a vision and then have some success, then it becomes a little easier. But adversity is a constant, so it's always waiting for you. But yeah, I think that was getting the buy-in. We had a great speech last week from a former general who was a A-10 pilot, and he said one of the first qualities for leaders is vision, right? Getting people to buy into to whatever it is or wherever you want to go.
I like to say a distinction in leadership. You can tell people what to do, but you can't make them want to do it, and
Right.
that's the real distinction of leadership. There
Yeah.
is getting people to buy in and to want to go on the mission that they're going on.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that passion for athletics led to a passion for leadership, and that became a passion for the great leaders. I mean, you mentioned being able to people to buy into things. I just finished Churchill's the most recent biography of Churchill, but you look at it on the world stage, and some of the great figures of all time leadership of getting people to buy into what he got people to buy into in his famous speech is that we'll fight on the beaches. And if you do the research, odds were against him, but he got an entire nation not only to believe in it but also win it. So that's where I think that developed from a love of football and sports, and just having that kind of gene, if you put it that way, to okay, um, leading on other levels, I guess, and my fascination with that, my attachment to it, really.
Amazing. I'm
Yeah.
curious, of course, on this, and I imagine some of what you've been talking about here might weave in, and we'll hear more of it through the rest of the podcast. But of course, here we're talking about in exploring the essence of leadership, what I call true leadership. That's going to mean different things to different people. What does true leadership mean to you? What makes a true leader in your eyes, Dean?
This is probably where I'm going to resort to some quotes. Again, we just talked about vision. It's one thing to have the vision. I think that's incredibly important. And of course, I use the Churchill quote. But you also have to be able to not only be an example of it, but you have to be able to articulate it. You have to be able to articulate it, down and up. And that's a nuanced communication style, if I can put it that way. I also used kind of it was Victor Hugo, by the way. I think the other thing that really shows, or what leadership means to me, and I can't emphasize this enough, is the adversity aspect of it. Everybody sort of wants to be the hero at the end, but nobody really wants to be the hero while you're going through the difficulty, or the leader while you're going through the difficulty. And that's the challenge. I mean, I often ask on interviews, like, hate to win or hate to lose or love to win. And sometimes I have different opinions on that answer, but I think the great leaders, I'll use sports. I'll continue to use sports. But you look at Tom Brady and you look at Michael Jordan, and it's really the the bitter taste of the losses, being cut from his high school basketball team, and Tom Brady, the adversity he went through at the University of Michigan. But the Hugo quote actually says, adversity makes great leaders, prosperity makes monsters. And the nuance there is that, it's not just about, achieving or winning once. It's really, doing it consistently. And I think that's a unique skill set for leadership. So I think there's that intangible quality of being able to communicate and be an example through adversity. And I think the third one is the ability to take responsibility and give credit. And I think this is a little bit in short supply these days. I'll use the JFK quote from the Bay of Pigs after the debacle that was the Bay of Pigs invasion, where it really wasn't his fault. He had a press conference and said, "Victory has a thousand fathers. Victory has a thousand fathers, and defeat is an orphan." And his polling skyrocketed after that. People respond to leaders who take responsibility and give credit, even sometimes when the credit is due to them. I think that's another real sort of intangible. A lot of people can do the X's and O's of leading, but those intangible qualities are the ones that really, I think, separate good from great.
Really, get a sense of it, especially from that last quote and the responsibility is a real sense of ownership, right? Which ties so closely into what you were saying about adversity too. It's like, the whole experience, not just the wins, right? I'm curious if you'd share what helps you navigate, right? The adversity of life, of leadership. What might you have to offer listeners
Yeah.
today?
Um, Again, I feel like I'm giving you a bunch of quotes, but I mean, I'm kind of like I said, a history person and a sports person. And I re-enrolled in a master's of liberal arts program. I think it was in like 1998. It was in the 90s. And the first speaker we had was the former press secretary, Mike McCurry, who was the press secretary under Bill Clinton. And at the time, there was a thing called the World Wide Web. And he said, before we entered this liberal arts program, the World Wide Web is going to change everything. That people will have these were his words, a plethora of choices, but a paucity of understanding. And his point is that the program that we were about to endeavor on was largely steeped in the classics and the great books. Um, and as much as things change, those things stay the same. Those qualities that you learn from the great leaders, however imperfect they were, remain. And it's actually becoming, obviously since 1998, now with AI, um, those characteristics are more important today than they've ever been. So when you ask me, I still kind of read history, because defeat and victory and how you handle it in adversity are going to be constants. They'll just be faster constants than they were before, happening in a faster time than they were before. So I try to, as much as things change, I still default back to those great leaders, those great leadership qualities. Um, you know, Patience, perseverance, you name them. I think they're more important now than ever. Not ever present in the world for sure, whether it's business, politics, sports. We see a lot of bad, but there's a lot of good. So I guess I call me kind of old school, but I believe in those kind of traditional leadership principles, and I think they're more important now than they've ever been.
I couldn't agree more. And so much of what you offer there aligns with, what we typically call soft skills. I like a reframe as essential skills. And you're, in essential meaning, that they've always been essential
Yeah,
and that they always will be, that there's an unchanging aspect of that, regardless of, the moment, or, the what moment we find ourselves in, or how different, the situation in history. There's
yeah,
the particular human beingness of leadership that remains a constant.
yeah, 100%. And again, I think about that quote Mike McCurry said often, which is it really is, whether it's business, sports, life in general. It's choices, and choices have impacts on you, on your family, on people, on people that you work with and work for you, and to have that kind of presence where you realize that and are able to have some kind of method in which you can make the right choice, even as time is short, clock's running out. Uh, Kind of going into football analogies now, but that makes it all the more difficult when things are moving at the speed they're moving at to continue to make good and right decisions. You're not going to do it all the time, but I think that's as much as we're going forward. To me, the I'll call them the classics. Those lessons I learned back then still apply. Again, take any great leader throughout all of time. Lincoln, Churchill, Kennedy, whoever you may be fascinated with. It was about the choices they made, difficult choices they made in difficult times. So I think that's the guiding principle for me. Like that inner core. That's the no matter you win or lose, whatever. That's the most important thing to me in leadership.
Love that. And, of course, this journey of leadership in life that is full of adversity, is shaped by fundamental turning points that we encounter along the way.
Yeah.
Can you share about a time when you realized that your way of leading or living no longer really met the demands of work and life, and you really needed to outgrow it?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to try to answer that question um, with a very vulnerable moment. And I'm going to probably go forward and back in time. But again, I played football all the way through college, and from the time I was a child to being 21 years old, and it it didn't end the way I expected it to end. It ended in failure, and the day it's over, um, you got a little bit of an identity crisis. You've been somebody for so long, and it's over instantaneously for 99% of athletes, college athletes and high school athletes. And you're forced to look like, who am I really? Um, and Colin Powell had a great quote, which is, "Don't put your ego too close to your position, so when your position fails, your ego doesn't fall with it." Um, so I could name, and again, going back to some of the people I respect and I admire, it's their ability to handle failure. Too often on interviews, I hear people talk about their successes. Like, if you think I'm going to believe that you've been successful in every endeavor you've ever been, every sales job you've ever had, or every coaching position you ever had, tell me about what you did when you lost, and you lost big. And what that, even when I'm talking to people about finances, like, okay, you beat the market or you whatever. Tell me about when you didn't, right? What was the course correction? And I think that takes an element of humility, which is, something I also think is in short supply. Um, so again, I hope that answers your question. And that was a very difficult time in my life, but it has repeated several times where something fails miserably. But it's how you respond to that. And I will tell you, I think that's what differentiates good leaders from great leaders to a lot of leaders who pose as leaders. Like, you will see what they're made of when failure happens.
And maybe this is the point at which I share that I was also a football player
Oh
myself.
wow, yeah,
Though I never made it to I never made it into college. It was definitely my favorite sport to play, and
yeah,
particularly what comes up was a good friend of mine that I played high school ball with, and was going to be going to a very good school to play, and he injured himself to the point
yeah,
uh, where his career was essentially ruined, and so I was with him in in that particular point of his life. I offer that up just to offer a point of like understanding and seeing
yeah.
that for a young person too, right?
Oh, I say this to young athletes all the time, which is, don't be single threaded with your identity, because
Yeah.
it will end.
So the thing that I'm curious about in that, because I think it's a really powerful story, right? Because you build, especially when you're young and you haven't necessarily gotten that lesson yet of
Yes,
right. And it's just such a like here, nobody can really prepare you for that moment in which the rug gets sort of pulled out from
right.
the life you've been living. So what did you have to outgrow in that moment in order to step into what was next for you?
Outgrow. Again, I think that in I don't know if I shared this with you previously. I also had a brief stint in politics where I lost in a pretty contested, hot race. In the two moments in time, which were you go from the whirlwind of being the center of attention to the next day waking up in your kitchen and you don't win. Um, again, I don't know if that's an intangible quality or not, but and it's something ironically that sports does teach you, right? And it kind of goes back to having a losing team. You have to always continue to believe, like, one, it's a teaching lesson, right? If you can easily get bogged down in your misery and become your own worst self critic. It was funny. Not too long after that, my father was a football player, and he knew I was struggling. The struggle went on long after the season ended. It continued well after graduation. And he handed me a book by a guy named Dr. George Sheehan. It was called Personal Best. Um, it's a great book, and he got me to take all that energy that I had used to become a football player and run. And I started running, which is, you go from a team sport with a lot of people watching to, running 10Ks and marathons. I highly encourage that book, even if you're not a runner. Um, but it just took that energy and sort of rechanneled it into something new, right? So again, that was how I got through that. And I got to tell you, that book, I still recommend it to people today because, again, when your ego or when your position falls, don't let your ego go with it. So, it's the when one door closes, another one opens sort of idea, but it's always been true. But again, then you get into those qualities of persistence, which I have a slide I use. I think it's from Coolidge. To start every single one of my, or Hoover, one of the two, every one of my team meetings with the persistence slide. Which I don't care what your degree is, I don't care where you went to college. The most important quality in life is persistence.
Well, I just feel like it speaks so well to, I don't know if you've heard this, and I don't know that I do it absolute justice, but you need to let go of who you think you are in
Yeah,
order
that's
in order to allow yourself to continue to grow
yeah,
and become.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
um
it's I guess so. So maybe this answers your question better. It's and this is a hard one. But even as I harken back to that master's in liberal arts program, it started with the whole Platonic or Socratic notion of humility. Know thyself. But and my father was a big, and that's hard as you become a leader. And I think that's what Hugo Black was saying about prosperity breeds monsters, because you start believing that you're the reason for all the success. And that I've seen that in business too. And you can get very heady, like, look what I did, and then the next day the job is gone. So I do think, and again, I don't want to be careful with the word humility, but always thinking you're right, always having to be the smartest person in the room, not, being curious and asking questions. Like, so, you pray for humility. Well, you might lose your job, you might lose your position. But I think that maybe goes back to your question, is like, it is hard to be humble. And I think it's really important to maintain, especially intellectually, humility. Don't let the ego get involved. It's hard because I think, at least in my business, everybody wants to appear, successful all the time. Humility is the answer to your question, I think.
well, I think it's extremely well fitting. It's interesting because I feel like oftentimes people feel like the presence of humility means sort of like acknowledging that you don't know anything, when really it's just acknowledging that you don't know everything.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
you know
I mean,
uh, and that's always true for all of
yeah,
us. you know
it,
uh,
it really
so
is.
uh, what's your vision, Dean, for your leadership, your legacy, the impact that you'd like to have in the years ahead?
Um, this might sound redundant, but yes, things are changing, but I'm very emphatic on, and there will be great leaders in the future. We have great leaders today. but remaining and adhering to much of what I learned in that program, and you know, the classics, the great books, the great leaders. Yes, flawed, but you talk about Lincoln, Washington, Kennedy, Reagan, Churchill, whomever it may be. Um, Heck, I even dug into the three-book Kairos LBJ thing. Was very flawed figure, very flawed figure. I don't think people know how flawed he was. Um, but there's nothing new under the sun, and there's nothing new under the sun with when it comes to leadership and the stuff we're speaking about: persistence, perseverance, humility. These are all constants. So, it's funny. I kind of mentor some younger people, and when I bring this stuff up, there seems to be, to use the McCurry word, a paucity of understanding about those great skills. Right? When we hear, oh, there's a lot of good stories, but some horror stories of the work, the current generation entering the workforce, not be prepared for a lot of the stuff we've talked about. Huge failure, never, being told like it's just not good enough, like that. So again, I think it's a fusion of the old and the new, and that whole idea that things are changing really fast. AI is changing the world and the landscape in ways we don't know how. Mike McCurry is right. There's a plethora of choices, and there's only going to be more. But there's a paucity of understanding. So, I don't think my impact will be major, but I hope the people that I've worked for or worked with, you know, the legacy will be like it was a fusion of the old and the new.
I'm curious where you're feeling the most stretched yourself right now. I mean, obviously, this path of leadership, of growth, the adversity of life, if we are growing, does not stop, at least in my in my experience.
Yeah.
Where's that edge for you right now?
Um, Boy, it's going to sound cliche, but yeah, I think AI is changing my business quickly. It's changing it for the customer. It's changing it how we do marketing. It's changing it how we do sales, and it's highly unpredictable for sure. So I'm sorry, I keep mixing metaphors between politics and sports, but it feels like, to use a football analogy, everything is the red zone all the time, and there's 3 seconds left on the clock. There, the, the pace of the game, the rate of growth, the speed at which things are changing. There's so much happening around you at one time that we emphasize on our team's process. Stick to the process. Like, we have a sales process we adhere to get things from stage one to stage two to stage three. um, it puts a lot of stress on that process with a short field and less time on the clock, and it just feels like there's no first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. Everything is like fast and has to happen. So you have to pick up the pace of your game. And again, there are some people that are entering the workforce right now that know how to use these tools, and that I can learn from. So where I have to stretch is leaning away from kind of the old methods to some of the new methods, and how can we do this better, and looking at some of the systems that have produced mediocre outcomes before, and like, how can we, and our CEO is great at this, which he challenges all to do some vibe coding. And I've done that, right? So I'm kind of, again, a little bit older on the back end of my career, but um, that's helped. That's helped. But it's the pace of the game.
That is perhaps a nice lead in to my next question, which is based on what you're seeing in your position of leadership. I mean, not just for yourself, but across the company from your purview. What's your take on what's separating leaders who are really excelling right now from those who are really struggling?
Um, I think the ones that struggle can get cannot really separate what's important, right? As the game gets fast and things happen fast and growth is has to occur, you have to focus. You have to have P1s, P2s, P3s. And I think the ones that struggle maybe get distracted. Um, I remember in politics, people say, well, there's the feel good stuff, then there's the stuff that really moves the meter, right? Which is it's very easy to get distracted and not focus, and get tactical. And I think where I see them struggle is in exactly that. I see them struggle sometimes, with communications as well. I've always loved to write. I've always loved to communicate. I've always loved to speak. Um, and sometimes you have to pivot for a different audience, whether that's the customer or somebody who works for you or a senior level executive. I see a lot of them struggle with comms, like written, oral. Um, that's critical, right? Because again, if you're communicating up, it's got to be precise, it's got to be accurate. Get one shot at that apple. Um, Hopefully that answers your question, but I see a lot of them struggle with what are the priorities, getting the team to kind of understand those priorities, reinforcing it, not deviating from it, and then again, I don't know if it's a generational thing or not, but comms drive me nuts. Bad comms drive me nuts. Don't just cut and paste something and put it into ChatGPT and tell me, this is a coherent message that should either go to a customer or a senior level executive.
I hear a little mix in there of, the just the development of that skill of communication, which of course, is extremely important, but also that more like I also heard the ability to not default to the tactical and to
Yes.
and to keep one's vision and again that feels like less of a skill than a capacity, right? Like
Yeah.
what is my capacity to not jump and solve the problem that's right in front of me and actually continue doing what we have agreed is a priority.
Yeah. So the general who was the A-10 pilot, who came into my meeting last week, and I had him come in specifically to talk about, leadership, building teams, scaling. He said the most important things that leaders can determine are vision and core values. And it sounds perhaps cliche, but it goes back to what we said, originally. Like, does everybody know where the truck is heading? Like, and are they enthusiastic about it? Have you painted that vision very effectively so that if you were to ask them, they would know everything from what they're supposed to be doing daily and what the priorities are, and everything is sort of nesting into that greater vision strategy. And then core values, and this one kind of caught me off guard, right? Because you can, and that's important. That's really important. And again, you've got to be an example about that, or to your team members. Um, and it can deviate between frontline managers and third line managers and leaders. But and I had this conversation with a leader pretty quickly, which is, or just recently, um, getting too tactical on stuff that doesn't matter. It comes down to the 80-20 or 90-10, however you want to put it. You've got to put your priorities where you're going to get the most return on that. Sometimes that's people, programs, whatever it may be. But I think that's where I see struggle. Um, and the core values and the vision piece, it is tightly tied to communication. Tightly tied. I mean, I see good operational leaders. In other words, they're really good in the tools we use for forecasting and predicting the business. But the communication of getting people to buy into the vision and the cultural values, that's an art form.
Yeah, thank you for that. So this last question, Dean, is a little bit more of an invitation. You've got the
Sure.
time and the space here to offer up to our listeners what's most in your mind and heart to share right now. Take your time. Floor is yours.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I don't want to be overly redundant, but I think there's an increasingly more pressure, um, on leaders, younger leaders, people. I see it with my children, to not adhere to kind of what those classic things, to make the expeditious decision in life, whether it's what the crowd is doing, what everybody's doing, that never works out well. Um, comes back down to character and discipline, and that it's hard to maintain. I have a lot of sympathy. I have two children that are in their 20s, and I don't recognize a lot of the things that they've had to deal with. And um, so I guess I would really encourage, for those interested in leadership, especially, to dive in, to find somebody in history that you really have a connection with. But don't stop there, because I don't care if it was Martin Luther King Jr. or John F. Kennedy, or pick your figure, whoever it may be. Their ideas were not new either. They're nested upon other ideas that came before them. Again, I'll divert into a little bit of politics, but in our founding document it says to form a more perfect union, not a perfect union, but and the plight of the individual is the same. You're going to make mistakes, but the qualities that you and I have spoke about today, really the principles, let's call them what they are, virtues, those are not going to change. There's nothing new that Dean Scontras is going to tell you that will be a mind-bending idea. I really, really encourage people, as the world changes and gets faster and speedier, to dig into these things, because yes, AI may change the world, but humanity will not change. We still need human to human contact. I hope that doesn't sound too corny, but again, we've touched on a few of them. If you're, I don't care if, and the Martin Luther King Jr. quote was, if you're going to be a street sweeper, be the best one. And those are all based upon these virtues. And I guess that's what I see. What's really on my mind is, I've had good experiences, I've had bad experiences. Sometimes we have leaders that in business and politics and culture that are not abiding by it. And speak up. You've got your integrity and your character. It doesn't mean you need to bend to it. And sometimes those are the most difficult decisions to make, whether the organization is just not something you believe in, the person's not something you believe in. Stand up, because the world needs it more now than ever.
Well, Dean, I so appreciate the wisdom that you've shared here today with me. I've gotten
You
so
bet.
much out of it, and I'm sure that whoever listens is equally going to benefit from what you've shared here today. Thank you so much for
You
being
bet, Ty.
a
Yeah,
guest in the True
you
Leadership
bet.
Podcast.
Yep.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
Yep.
That's it for this episode of the True Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this to catch future episodes. This conversation was brought to you by One Mountain Leadership, where we help leaders grow the capacity, confidence, and presence of true leadership through the True Leadership Approach. To learn more about the approach, our offerings, our community, and how we can help you realize your potential in both leadership and in life, visit us at onemountainleadership.com.